Sarah Mitchell stood in the corner of the crowded ballroom, her fingers unconsciously tracing the rough texture of the scars that ran down the left side of her neck. The fundraising gala was in full swing, with elegantly dressed guests mingling beneath crystal chandeliers, their laughter echoing off marble walls. She had been invited as a representative of the Veterans Rehabilitation Center where she volunteered, but she felt utterly out of place among these polished socialites. The burns covered nearly 30% of her body. Souvenirs from a roadside bomb in Afghanistan 7 years ago. The explosion had torn through her medical convoy, killing 3 of her fellow soldiers and leaving her fighting for her life in a field hospital. The physical scars were visible, running from her jawline down her neck and disappearing beneath the collar of her dress. But it was the invisible ones that hurt more. The ones that made her wake up screaming at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat and convinced she could still smell burning flesh. She had worn a high-neck dress tonight, trying to cover as much as possible, but the fabric could only do so much. Sarah watched as a woman in a designer gown whispered something to her companion while looking in her direction. The companion glanced over, and both women quickly looked away, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. Sarah was used to it by now, but it never stopped stinging. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. Sarah took a glass, more to have something to hold than because she wanted to drink. She had learned that keeping her hands occupied made social situations slightly more bearable. At least then, people might not notice how they trembled sometimes, especially in crowded places where loud noises reminded her of gunfire and explosions. "Quite the gathering, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Sarah turned to see an older man with kind eyes and silver hair. He wore his tuxedo with the ease of someone comfortable in formal settings. "I'm Robert Harrison. I help organize these events, though I'll admit they're not really my scene either." Sarah offered a small smile. "Sarah Mitchell. And no, not really mine either." Robert nodded toward the crowd. "Half these people are here because they think it makes them look good. It's the other half because their spouses drag them along. But the money goes to good causes, so we tolerate the pretense." He paused, his eyes kind but direct. "You served, didn't you?" Something about his straightforward manner put Sarah at ease. "Army medic. 2 tours in Afghanistan." "Thank you for your service," Robert said. And unlike the empty phrases she usually heard, his words carried genuine weight. "My son served in Iraq. He didn't make it home." "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly, and she meant it. She had held too many dying soldiers in her arms, had seen too many flag-draped coffins loaded onto transport planes. Before Robert could respond, a burst of loud laughter erupted from a group nearby. Sarah's entire body tensed, her hand tightening around the champagne glass until her knuckles turned white. The laughter continued, shrill and grating, and she felt her heart begin to race. Robert noticed her reaction and gently touched her elbow. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded gratefully, and they made their way through the crowd toward the garden doors. As they passed, she heard fragments of conversation from the laughing group. A woman in a red dress was holding court, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "Did you see the one in the corner? Those scars are absolutely ghastly. I don't know why they let people like that into events like this. It's rather off-putting, don't you think?" Sarah froze mid-step. The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She had heard similar comments before, whispered behind hands or said just loud enough for her to overhear. But the casual cruelty never got easier to bear. I understand they served and all," another voice chimed in. "A man this time, but surely they could cover up better. It's a formal event after all. There's such a thing as appropriate presentation." The woman in red laughed again, that same piercing sound. "Exactly. And the way she keeps touching her neck, it's like she wants people to stare. If I looked like that, I simply wouldn't go out in public. Some things are better left at home." Sarah felt her face burn with humiliation and anger. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people who would only see it as weakness or, worse, as confirmation of their cruel assessments. Robert's hand was still on her elbow, his grip firm and supportive. "Ignore them," he said quietly, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "They're not worth your tears or your time." But Sarah couldn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot, too loud. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She recognized the signs of an oncoming panic attack, something that had plagued her since returning from Afghanistan. The walls seemed to close in, and the elegant ballroom transformed in her mind into the cramped interior of the convoy vehicle seconds before the explosion. "Sarah," Robert said gently but firmly, "look at me. Focus on my voice. You're safe. You're here, not there. Breathe with me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to anchor herself in the present moment. Robert breathed slowly, deeply, and she tried to match his rhythm. Gradually, the panic began to recede. Though her body still trembled with adrenaline and emotion, the woman in red had moved on to another topic. Her group absorbed in their shallow conversations, completely unaware or uncaring of the pain their words had caused. Sarah wondered how many other veterans had been subjected to similar treatment. How many had left events like this feeling small and ashamed of sacrifices they had made in service to their country. Come on," Robert said softly. "Let's get you outside." They walked through the garden doors onto a terrace overlooking manicured lawns. The cool evening air was a relief after the stifling atmosphere inside. Sarah leaned against the stone balustrade, letting the breeze cool her flushed face. The sounds of the gala faded to a dull murmur behind the closed doors. "I shouldn't have come," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew this would happen. It always does." Robert stood beside her, looking out at the garden. Those people in there, they have no idea what sacrifice means. They live in a bubble of privilege and comfort, never having to face real hardship or danger. Your scars, Sarah, they make them uncomfortable because they're a reminder that the world isn't always safe and pretty, that there are people who put themselves in harm's way so others can sleep peacefully at night. "They think I'm hideous," Sarah said, finally voicing the fear that haunted her every time she looked in a mirror. "They think I should hide myself away." "They're fools," Robert said bluntly. "Every mark on your skin is a testament to your courage and service. You earned those scars saving lives and serving your country. There's nothing hideous about that." Sarah turned to look at him, surprised by the passion in his voice. "You sound like you mean that." "Do," Robert assured her. "My son, before he died, he wrote me letters from Iraq. In one of them, he talked about a medic who ran through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers. He said she saved 3 men that day, even though she was injured herself. He said watching her work made him understand what real bravery looked like." He paused, his eyes glistening. "I've often wondered if he was talking about you." The timeline matches, and he mentioned her name was Sarah. Sarah's breath caught. She remembered that day, remembered the chaos and terror, remembered dragging soldiers to safety while bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. She had been hit by shrapnel, minor wounds compared to what could have happened. But she had kept working until every wounded man was stabilized. "I don't know if I'm the same, Sarah," she said quietly, "but I remember days like that. We all did what we had to do." "That's the difference between you and the people inside," Robert said. "You understand duty and sacrifice. They only understand appearances and social status." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, the night air carrying the scent of flowers from the garden below. Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. For the first time that evening, she didn't feel like she had to hide or apologize for existing. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," Robert said after a while. "He should be arriving soon. He's the keynote speaker for tonight, though most of these socialites probably don't realize the significance of who he is." Before Sarah could ask who he meant, the terrace doors opened and a distinguished older gentleman stepped out. He wore his tuxedo with military precision, and even in civilian clothes, there was no mistaking his bearing. This was a man used to command, used to respect. His hair was white, his face lined with years of experience and responsibility, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "Robert," the man said, his voice carrying natural authority, "I needed a break from the crowd. These events always feel more like endurance tests than fundraisers." "General Morrison, Robert greeted him warmly. "I was just telling Sarah here that you'd be speaking tonight." "Sarah Mitchell, this is General James Morrison, retired commander of the 3rd Infantry Division." The general turned his full attention to Sarah, and she felt herself straighten instinctively, falling into old habits of military bearing. His eyes took in her scars without flinching or looking away, his expression neutral but not unkind. "Mitchell," he said thoughtfully, "were you with the 47th Medical Company?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir." "How did you know?" "I make it my business to know the soldiers who serve under my command, even the ones I never met personally," the general replied. "I read every after-action report, every commendation. Your name appeared in several of them." He glanced back at the closed terrace doors, his expression darkening. "I couldn't help but overhear some conversation as I was coming out. Something about inappropriate appearances at formal events." Sarah felt her cheeks burn again, but this time with shame rather than anger. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet the general's eyes. "I was going to save my speech for the podium," General Morrison said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "but perhaps some things need to be said sooner rather than later. Would you mind accompanying me back inside, Sarah?" Sarah looked up, confused. "Sir?" "Trust me," the general said, and there was something in his expression that reminded Sarah of why men and women followed officers into battle. It's time some people learned what those scars really mean. Sarah's heart pounded as she followed General Morrison back into the ballroom. Robert walked beside her, offering silent support with his presence. The crowd seemed even larger now, the noise even louder. She wanted to refuse to run back to her car and drive home to the quiet safety of her small apartment. But something in the general's demeanor made her trust him. Besides, she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting cruel words make her feel less than human. The general moved through the crowd with purpose. His military bearing, cutting a path through the clusters of socialites. People noticed him, stepping aside with murmurs of recognition. Sarah realized that many here knew exactly who he was, even if they hadn't recognized his significance earlier. The woman in the red dress and her group were still standing near the center of the room, their laughter now mixed with animated conversation about vacation, homes and designer fashion. General Morrison walked directly up to the small raised platform at the front of the ballroom, where a podium stood waiting for the evening speeches. He climbed the steps with the ease of a man who had addressed troops in war zones and politicians in Washington with equal confidence. A microphone rested on the podium, and he tapped it twice, the sound echoing through the speakers and cutting through the ambient noise. The conversations died down gradually as people turned to see who had taken the stage. The event coordinator, a nervous-looking woman with a clipboard, hurried over with a confused expression, clearly wondering why the keynote speaker was beginning before dinner had even been served. "Good evening," General Morrison said, his voice filling the room with natural authority. "I know I'm scheduled to speak later, but something has come to my attention that can't wait. I'm General James Morrison, United States Army, retired. And I'm here tonight because I believe in supporting our veterans. But I'm beginning to wonder if everyone in this room shares that belief." An uncomfortable silence settled over the ballroom. Sarah stood at the edge of the platform, feeling exposed under the lights and the stares of hundreds of guests. She caught sight of the woman in red, who was watching with a puzzled expression, clearly not understanding what was happening or why. "I've spent 40 years in military service," the general continued, his tone measured but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I've commanded thousands of soldiers, sent young men and women into combat, had the heartbreaking duty of writing letters to families when those soldiers didn't come home. I've pinned medals on heroes and stood at attention at more funerals than I can count. I thought I understood the cost of war and the debt we owed to those who serve." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "But tonight, I've been reminded that not everyone understands that cost. Not everyone sees the true price that soldiers pay when they put on a uniform and step into harm's way." Sarah watched as people shifted uncomfortably. Some looked genuinely engaged, leaning forward to hear better. Others, particularly the woman in red and her group, wore expressions of polite confusion, still not grasping that this speech was directed at them. "A few minutes ago," the general said, his voice growing harder, "I overheard a conversation. Actually, several conversations over the course of the evening. Comments about appearances, about what's appropriate for formal events, about people who should perhaps stay home if they can't meet certain aesthetic standards." Now the woman in red's expression changed, a flicker of understanding dawning. She glanced at her companions, then back at the general, her face beginning to flush. "Let me tell you about appropriate," General Morrison continued. "Let me tell you what I find appropriate. I find it appropriate that soldiers like Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, who is standing right here, chose to serve her country not once but twice, deploying to one of the most dangerous regions in the world as a combat medic." He gestured toward Sarah, and hundreds of eyes turned to her. She felt her face burning, but she kept her head up, refusing to look away or shrink back. The general's words gave her strength, even as her heart raced with anxiety. "I find it appropriate that when her convoy was hit by an IED, when the vehicle exploded into flames and chaos," Staff Sergeant Mitchell didn't run for cover. She ran toward the burning wreckage. She pulled 3 wounded soldiers from that inferno, sustaining severe burns in the process. One of those soldiers was a 19-year-old kid from Ohio who would have burned to death if she hadn't reached him. The ballroom was completely silent now. Sarah could hear her own breathing, could feel tears threatening to spill over. She hadn't talked about that day in years, had tried to bury the memories deep where they couldn't hurt her. She dragged those soldiers to safety while enemy fire rained down around her. The general continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She stabilized them under conditions that would make this ballroom look like paradise. And when the medevac helicopter finally arrived, she refused to be evacuated until every other wounded soldier was loaded first." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The burns you see on Staff Sergeant Mitchell's neck and face, the scars that some of you found so offensive, so inappropriate for your delicate sensibilities, those are the marks of a hero. Every single line, every patch of damaged skin, represents a moment of extraordinary courage and selfless service." Sarah saw the woman in red had gone pale, her hand pressed against her mouth. Her companions looked equally stricken, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Around the ballroom, other guests wore expressions of shame, understanding, and respect in varying degrees. "Do you know what Staff Sergeant Mitchell received for her actions that day?" the general asked. "She received the Silver Star, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor in combat. She also received burns covering 30% of her body, hearing damage from the explosion, and post-traumatic stress disorder that will affect her for the rest of her life." He turned to look directly at Sarah, and she saw moisture in his eyes. "She gave us everything she had. She gave pieces of herself that can never be recovered. And she did it so that people like all of you could sleep safely at night, could gather at elegant parties, could live your lives without fear of bombs and bullets and enemies at the gate." The general's attention shifted back to the crowd, his expression hard and unforgiving. "So when I hear someone suggest that her scars are ghastly, that she should cover up better or perhaps stay home, it makes me question what kind of society we've become. It makes me wonder if we've grown so comfortable, so removed from the realities of war, that we've forgotten what it costs to maintain that comfort." A man near the front of the crowd began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, some with tears streaming down their faces, others looking chastened and moved. The standing ovation continued for what felt like minutes, the sound echoing off the marble walls and crystal chandeliers. Sarah stood frozen, overwhelmed by the response. She had spent so many years feeling ashamed of her scars, hiding them, avoiding situations where people might see them and judge her. Now hundreds of people were applauding her, acknowledging her sacrifice in a way that felt both validating and deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being celebrated. She had only done her job, what any medic would have done. The general waited for the applause to die down before continuing. "I want to be very clear about something. The men and women who serve in our military come back changed. Some carry visible scars, like Staff Sergeant Mitchell. Others carry invisible wounds that are just as real and just as painful. They suffer from PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, depression, anxiety, and a host of other challenges that make reintegration into civilian life incredibly difficult. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles white. These soldiers need our support, not our judgment. They need our understanding, not our pity. They need opportunities, healthcare, and communities that welcome them home with open arms. Not whispered comments and averted eyes. Sarah watched as the woman in red wiped tears from her cheeks. Whatever cruel satisfaction she had taken in mocking Sarah's appearance had been replaced by visible remorse. But Sarah found herself unable to feel triumphant. She didn't want revenge or to see others shamed. She just wanted to be seen as a whole person, not reduced to her scars or her trauma. "This fundraiser tonight is supposed to support veterans' services," the general said, his tone softening slightly. "That's a worthy cause, one I'm honored to support. But I want everyone here to understand that supporting veterans isn't just about writing checks, though that certainly helps. It's about changing how we think about and treat the men and women who served." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. It's about recognizing that a veteran with visible scars has nothing to be ashamed of and everything to be proud of. It's about understanding that when a veteran struggles with anxiety or depression or anger, they're not weak or broken. They're dealing with the aftermath of experiences most of us can't imagine. Robert had climbed the steps to stand beside Sarah, his presence a comfort as she struggled to process everything that was happening. She had come to this event expecting to be ignored at best, mocked at worst. Instead, she was standing on a stage while a decorated general spoke about her courage in front of hundreds of people. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "I've commanded soldiers in 3 wars," the general continued, his voice growing quieter but no less intense. "I've seen incredible acts of bravery and sacrifice. I've watched young men and women face death with courage I can barely comprehend. And you know what I've learned? The real test of a society isn't how it treats its heroes in the immediate aftermath of their service. It's how it treats them years later, when the parades are over and the attention has moved on." He paused, letting that sink in. It's easy to thank someone for their service with empty words. It's much harder to actually support them, to see past their scars or their struggles and recognize the human being underneath. It's harder to create a society where veterans don't have to hide their wounds or feel ashamed of what they've been through. Sarah felt tears finally spill down her cheeks. She didn't try to wipe them away. For so long she had carried the weight of shame about her appearance, about her panic attacks, about the way she couldn't always control her reactions to loud noises or crowded spaces. Hearing the general validate her experience, hearing him tell a room full of strangers that her scars were nothing to be ashamed of, it felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. "I want to issue a challenge to everyone here tonight," General Morrison said, his voice rising with renewed energy. "Don't just write a check and feel good about yourselves. Don't just thank the next veteran you see and think you've done your duty. Really commit to making a difference. Hire veterans at your companies. Support legislation that funds mental health services and medical care for those who served. Stand up when you hear someone making cruel comments about a veteran's appearance or struggles." He gestured to Sarah again. "Be worthy of the sacrifice that people like Staff Sergeant Mitchell made for you. Be worthy of the young men and women who are serving right now in dangerous places around the world. They deserve better than a society that celebrates them in theory, but judges them in practice." The general's words hung in the air, challenging and convicting. Sarah could see people nodding, some visibly moved, others looking thoughtful. The atmosphere in the ballroom had completely transformed from the frivolous party atmosphere of earlier. Something real and significant was happening. A shift in awareness that Sarah hadn't expected. "I apologize for departing from the prepared remarks," the general said, a slight smile finally crossing his face. "But some things are too important to save for the right moment. Some truths need to be spoken when the opportunity arises. And if I made anyone uncomfortable, if I ruined anyone's evening, I'm not sorry about that at all." A ripple of surprised laughter ran through the crowd, breaking some of the tension. The general stepped back from the podium, then turned to Sarah. For a moment, she wasn't sure what to do. Then he saluted her, a crisp, military salute that conveyed respect and honor. Sarah's training took over. Despite the formal dress and the civilian setting, despite the years since she had worn a uniform, she returned the salute. It felt right, a moment of connection between two soldiers who understood what service meant, what it cost, what it was worth. The ballroom erupted in applause again as Sarah lowered her hand from the salute. General Morrison extended his hand to help her down from the platform, and she took it gratefully, her legs feeling shaky after the emotional intensity of the past few minutes. As her feet touched the floor, she found herself immediately surrounded by people wanting to speak with her, to thank her, to apologize for their earlier ignorance. An older gentleman, with kind eyes and a slight tremor in his hands, was the first to reach her. "Vietnam," he said simply, showing her his own hands. "Agent Orange. Nobody talks about it at these things, so I usually don't mention it. But after hearing the general speak, after hearing your story, I wanted you to know you're not alone." Sarah felt a connection form instantly, that unique bond shared by people who had seen combat and carried its marks. "Thank you," she said, squeezing his hands gently. "Thank you for your service." "Thank you for yours," he replied, his voice cracking slightly. "And thank you for being brave enough to be here tonight, scars and all. You reminded an old soldier that he doesn't have to hide either." More people approached, a steady stream of guests who had found themselves moved by the general's words. Some were veterans themselves, sharing quiet stories of their own struggles and scars. Others were civilians who admitted they had never really thought about what soldiers went through, had never considered that the warriors who protected them came home changed by their experiences. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, waited patiently for her turn to speak. When she finally reached Sarah, tears were streaming down her face. "My brother served in Iraq," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He came home with PTSD, and it was really bad. He couldn't hold down a job, couldn't sleep, couldn't be around people. Everyone kept telling him to just get over it, to be grateful he made it home alive." She paused, struggling to continue. "He killed himself 2 years ago. I've been so angry at everyone who didn't understand, who didn't help, who made him feel broken and worthless. Hearing the general tonight, hearing your story, it's the first time I felt like someone actually gets it." Sarah pulled the young woman into a hug, feeling her own tears start again. "I'm so sorry about your brother. I'm so sorry he didn't get the help he needed. He would have liked you," the woman said, pulling back and wiping her eyes. "He would have understood your strength. Thank you for still being here, for still fighting." The interactions continued for nearly an hour. Sarah found herself in conversations she never could have imagined, with people opening up about their own experiences with military service, their family members who had served, their regrets about not doing more to support veterans in their communities. The event had transformed from a shallow social gathering into something meaningful and raw, with real connections being formed and real understanding being reached. Through it all, she kept catching glimpses of the woman in the red dress. She stood apart from the crowd now, no longer surrounded by her laughing friends. Her companions had dispersed, perhaps uncomfortable with the dramatic turn the evening had taken, or perhaps ashamed of their earlier behavior. The woman herself looked like she wanted to approach Sarah but couldn't quite gather the courage. Finally, as the crowd around Sarah began to thin, the woman in red took a few hesitant steps forward. Up close, she looked younger than Sarah had initially thought, probably only in her early 30s. Her makeup was smudged from crying, and her confident demeanor had been replaced by visible anxiety. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said without preamble, her voice shaking. "What I said earlier, it was cruel and ignorant and inexcusable. I have no defense except that I'm a shallow, privileged person who has never had to face real hardship or consider what others have sacrificed." Sarah studied her for a moment, trying to decide how she felt. The anger and humiliation from earlier had faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange sense of peace. "What's your name?" she asked. "Elizabeth," the woman replied, looking surprised by the question. Elizabeth Winters. Well, Elizabeth, I appreciate the apology, Sarah said carefully. But I need you to understand something. I'm not unique. There are thousands of veterans dealing with visible and invisible scars, trying to navigate a civilian world that often doesn't understand them. Your words tonight hurt me, but more importantly, it reflected an attitude that hurts countless others who don't have a general to defend them. Elizabeth nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. No. I've been standing here listening to all these people sharing their stories, and I feel sick about who I've been, about the things I've said and thought. My father was in the military, did you know that? He served in Desert Storm. He never talked about it, and I never asked. I just took for granted that he was my dad, never thinking about what he might have experienced or what it cost him. It's not too late to ask, Sarah said gently. It's not too late to learn and do better. I want to do better, Elizabeth said earnestly. I want to actually help, not just show up at fancy fundraisers and pretend I care. The company I work for has a veterans hiring program, but I've never paid attention to it. I'm going to change that. I'm going to volunteer at the Veterans Center. I'm going to actually put my money and my time where my mouth is. Sarah saw the sincerity in Elizabeth's eyes and felt some of her skepticism fade. People could change. They could learn from their mistakes and become better versions of themselves. That was worth encouraging, even if it meant extending grace to someone who had hurt her. The Veterans Center always needs volunteers, Sarah said, pulling out her phone. Give me your number, and I'll send you the coordinator's contact information. Fair warning, though, it's not glamorous work. It's challenging and sometimes heartbreaking, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Elizabeth entered her number with trembling hands. Thank you, she said softly. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. As Elizabeth walked away, Robert appeared at Sarah's side again. You handled that with remarkable grace, he observed. Not everyone would have been so forgiving. Sarah shrugged. Holding on to anger just hurts me more than it hurts them. And if she actually follows through, if she actually helps other veterans, then something good came from tonight's ugliness. Very wise, Robert said with a smile. My son would have liked you. He always said the best soldiers were the ones who never lost their humanity, even in the middle of war. General Morrison joined them, looking satisfied despite the exhaustion evident in his face. That was quite a departure from my prepared speech, he said with a slight smile. My publicist is probably having a heart attack. It was perfect, Robert assured him. It was exactly what needed to be said. The general turned to Sarah. I hope I didn't overstep by sharing your story. I didn't ask permission, and that wasn't entirely appropriate, Sarah said quickly. I mean, it was a shock, but I'm glad you did it. I've spent so long hiding, so long feeling ashamed. Having someone like you validate my experience, tell all these people that my scars are nothing to be ashamed of, it meant everything. You never should have felt ashamed, the general said firmly. But I understand why you did. Our society makes it very difficult for veterans to integrate back into civilian life. We celebrate them from a distance but struggle to accept them up close, especially when they carry visible or psychological wounds. He glanced around the ballroom, where small groups of people were still engaged in intense conversations. The superficial party atmosphere completely dissolved. I think tonight might have opened some eyes. Whether it translates into real change remains to be seen, but at least it's a start. The event coordinator approached, her earlier nervousness replaced by genuine enthusiasm. General Morrison, that was incredible. We've already received commitments for double the donations we expected tonight. People want to contribute to veteran services, want to fund mental health programs and job training initiatives. This is unprecedented. The general nodded, pleased but not surprised. People want to help. They just need to understand what help actually looks like. They need to see beyond the patriotic rhetoric to the real human beings who served and the real challenges they face. I guess the evening wound down. Sarah found herself part of an impromptu gathering of veterans and their supporters. They shared stories, exchanged contact information, discussed ideas for supporting returning soldiers and creating communities where veterans felt welcomed and understood. The Vietnam vet, with trembling hands, sat with a young Marine who had lost both legs in Afghanistan. The two men separated by decades but connected by shared experience. A Navy veteran spoke with the sister of the soldier who had died by suicide, offering support and understanding that only someone who had been there could provide. Sarah watched these interactions with a mixture of hope and sorrow. Hope, because real connections were forming, because people were committing to actually making a difference. Sorrow, because it had taken a confrontation and a general speech to make it happen. Because too many veterans never got this kind of support or understanding. As midnight approached and guests began to leave, Sarah prepared to head home. The emotional roller coaster of the evening had left her drained but oddly energized. She had arrived feeling ashamed and out of place. She was leaving feeling seen, valued, and connected to a community she hadn't known existed in the civilian world. Robert walked her to the parking lot, his own car parked nearby. "Tonight was significant," he said as they reached her vehicle. "I think you've helped change some hearts and minds, Sarah. You and the general both." "I just stood there," Sarah protested. "The general did all the heavy lifting." "You were there," Robert corrected. "You were visible and real and impossible to ignore. That matters more than you know. When people can put a face and a story to abstract concepts like sacrifice and service, it changes how they think." Sarah unlocked her car, then turned to face Robert. "Why were you so kind to me tonight? When everyone else was avoiding me or talking about me, you actually saw me as a person." Robert's expression grew sad. "My son's letters from Iraq, the ones I mentioned earlier, they changed how I see veterans. He wrote about the fear, the exhaustion, the impossible choices soldiers have to make. He wrote about watching friends die and wondering if he would be next. He made me understand that war isn't noble or glorious. It's traumatic and terrible, and the people who fight in wars need support and understanding, not judgment." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "He died 2 weeks before he was supposed to come home. A sniper shot during what should have been a routine patrol. I never got to welcome him back, never got to help him readjust to civilian life. So I try to honor his memory by being there for other veterans, by seeing them and supporting them the way I would have supported my son." Sarah felt tears well up again. She seemed to have cried more tonight than in the past year combined, but these were different tears. Not tears of shame or pain, but of connection and understanding. "Your son was lucky to have you," she said softly. "I'm sure he knew how much you loved him." "I hope so," Robert said. "I hope wherever he is, he knows that I'm trying to make a difference. Trying to help the people who served alongside him and the ones who came after." They exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch. Robert mentioned that he organized regular veterans gatherings and insisted that Sarah should attend. She found herself agreeing, something she never would have done before tonight. The isolation she had wrapped around herself like armor no longer felt necessary or even desirable. As Sarah drove home through the quiet streets, she replayed the evening's events in her mind. The cruel words that had cut so deep, the general's powerful defense, the connections formed and apologies offered, the glimpse of a community that understood and supported veterans in meaningful ways. It had been one of the most emotionally intense nights of her life, but also one of the most healing. The days following the gala brought unexpected changes to Sarah's life. She woke up the morning after to find her phone flooded with messages. Someone had recorded General Morrison's speech and posted it online, and it had gone viral overnight. Millions of people had watched the video, shared it, commented on it. The story of the cruel comments and the general's response had struck a chord with people across the country. Sarah sat in her small apartment, scrolling through the responses with a mixture of wonder and anxiety. Most comments were supportive, praising the general for his words and expressing admiration for Sarah's service. But there were also critics, people who accused the general of grandstanding or who questioned whether Sarah was exploiting her service for attention. The internet, she was learning, was never entirely kind. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Staff Sergeant Mitchell. This is Amanda Chen from the Veterans Outreach Network. I saw the video of General Morrison's speech last night, and I had to call. We've been trying to raise awareness about the challenges veterans face when reintegrating into civilian life, and your story has opened doors we've been trying to pry open for years." Sarah listened as Amanda explained that multiple media outlets wanted to interview her. that veterans organizations were reaching out with support and partnership opportunities, that her story had sparked a national conversation about how society treats wounded warriors. It was overwhelming, almost too much to process. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," Sarah admitted. "I'm not a spokesperson or an activist. I'm just someone trying to live my life." "I understand completely," Amanda said, her voice kind but persistent. "But your story matters. Your visibility matters. There are thousands of veterans struggling in silence, feeling ashamed of their scars and their struggles. Seeing you stand up, seeing a general defend you so passionately, it gives them hope and validation." Sarah thought about the Vietnam veteran with shaking hands, about the woman whose brother had killed himself, about all the people at the gala who had shared their stories with her. "Okay," she said slowly. "I'll think about it, but I need some time to process everything that happened." Of course, Amanda agreed. "Take all the time you need, but know that when you're ready, we're here to support you." Over the next few weeks, Sarah did several carefully chosen interviews. She spoke about her experience in Afghanistan, about the challenges of recovering from physical and psychological wounds, about the moment at the gala when she overheard those cruel comments. Each time she told her story, it got a little easier. The shame that had clung to her for years began to loosen its grip. She also started attending the veterans' gatherings that Robert had mentioned. The first meeting was held in a community center, a casual affair with coffee and folding chairs. About 20 people showed up, a mix of veterans from different eras and conflicts. There was none of the awkwardness Sarah usually felt in social situations. Everyone in that room understood what it meant to serve, what it meant to come home changed, what it cost to try to build a life after war. An Iraq War veteran named Marcus became a friend. He had lost an arm to an IED and struggled with depression. But he had found purpose in advocating for veterans' mental health services. "The worst part isn't the missing arm," he told Sarah over coffee one afternoon. "It's the feeling that nobody who hasn't been there can understand what you went through. That's why groups like this matter. You get it? We don't need explanations or apologies. We just need connection." Sarah found herself growing more comfortable in her own skin. She stopped wearing high-necked clothes to hide her scars. She started talking more openly about her PTSD and the coping strategies she used to manage her symptoms. She discovered that vulnerability, rather than making her weak, actually made her stronger and more connected to the people around her. Elizabeth, the woman in the red dress, true to her word, began volunteering at the Veterans Center. Sarah was skeptical at first, expecting Elizabeth to lose interest after a few weeks. But weeks turned into months, and Elizabeth kept showing up. She helped veterans navigate benefits applications, organize job fairs, and worked tirelessly to connect veterans with resources they needed. One day, Elizabeth pulled Sarah aside at the center. "I talked to my father," she said, her eyes bright with emotion. "I asked him about Desert Storm, about his service. He actually opened up to me for the first time in my life. He told me about things he saw, things he did, things that still haunt him. I had no idea he was carrying all of that. I've spent my whole life living in the same house with a veteran and never really seeing him. How is he doing?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "Better, I think," Elizabeth replied. "Just having someone to talk to, someone who wants to understand rather than judge, it seems to have helped. And it's changed our relationship. We're closer now than we've ever been." Sarah smiled, feeling genuinely happy for Elizabeth. "That's wonderful. I'm glad something good came from that terrible night." "More than something good," Elizabeth corrected. "That night changed my life. It woke me up to how shallow and selfish I'd been. I'm not perfect now. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm trying. I'm actually trying to be a person who makes a difference." The Veterans Center thrived with increased support following the viral video. Donations poured in, allowing them to expand their services and hire additional staff. They started new programs for PTSD treatment, job training, and family support. General Morrison became a regular presence, using his influence to advocate for better veteran services at both state and federal levels. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial spokesperson for the center. She spoke at schools, community events, and military bases about the importance of supporting veterans. She was honest about her struggles, about the bad days when getting out of bed felt impossible, about the nightmares that still woke her up screaming sometimes. But she also talked about the good days, about the progress she had made, about the community that had embraced and supported her. At one speaking event at a high school, a teenage girl raised her hand during the question period. "My mom is in the Army," she said nervously. "She's deployed right now, and I'm scared she'll come home different. I'm scared she'll have scars like yours or PTSD or something, and I won't know how to help her." Sarah's heart went out to this young girl carrying such a heavy burden. "Your mom is lucky to have a daughter who cares so much," she said gently. "If she does come home with scars, physical or psychological, the best thing you can do is love her unconditionally. Don't treat her like she's broken. Don't pity her. Just be there, be patient, and understand that she might need time and support to readjust to civilian life." The girl nodded, tears in her eyes. After the event, she came up to Sarah and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I feel less scared now." These moments, Sarah realized, were why her visibility mattered. Every person she reached, every mind she changed, every scared teenager she comforted, it all contributed to creating a society that better understood and supported its veterans. The shame she had carried for so long had been transformed into purpose. 6 months after the gala, the Veterans Center organized a special event to honor local veterans. General Morrison was the keynote speaker, and he had asked Sarah to introduce him. She stood backstage, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves but no longer paralyzed by anxiety. She had learned to push through the fear, to use her voice even when it shook. The auditorium was packed with veterans, their families, and community supporters. Sarah spotted Robert in the front row, smiling up at her encouragingly. Elizabeth sat beside him. No longer the shallow socialite from that night, but someone genuinely committed to making a difference. Marcus was there with his wife and kids, looking proud and happy. The Vietnam veteran with trembling hands waved at her from his seat, his own son beside him. Sarah approached the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. 6 months ago, she began, I attended a fundraising gala. I went because I believed in supporting veterans, but I felt completely out of place. I wore a high-neck dress trying to hide my scars. I stood in corners, avoiding eye contact. I wanted to be invisible because I was ashamed of what war had done to my body and my mind. She paused, gathering her thoughts. That night, I overheard people making cruel comments about my appearance. They said my scars were ghastly, that I shouldn't be at formal events, that I should stay home. Those words cut deep because they reflected fears I already had about myself, beliefs I had internalized about being damaged and unworthy. The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. But something happened that night that changed everything. General James Morrison overheard those comments too, and instead of letting them pass, he did something extraordinary. He took the stage and he told those people and everyone else in that room what my scars really meant. He refused to let ignorance and cruelty go unchallenged. Sarah felt emotion welling up but pushed through. His words that night freed me from shame I had carried for years. They helped me understand that my scars aren't marks of ugliness or weakness. They're a testament to my service, to my courage, to my willingness to put others before myself. They're nothing to hide or apologize for. She gestured to the audience. Every person in this room, whether you served or you're here supporting someone who did, you're part of a community that understands sacrifice and courage. You know that war changes people, that it leaves marks both visible and invisible. And you know that those marks don't make someone less valuable or less worthy of respect and love. Sarah's voice grew stronger. In the past 6 months, I've learned that sharing my story, being visible and vulnerable, it helps other people. It helps veterans who feel isolated and ashamed. It helps families trying to understand what their loved ones went through. It helps communities learn how to better support the men and women who served. She smiled, feeling truly happy for perhaps the first time since before her deployment. So I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm standing here, scars and all, proud of my service and grateful for this community that has embraced me. And I'm honored to introduce a man who taught me that lesson, who showed me that my scars tell a story worth sharing. Please welcome General James Morrison." The audience erupted in applause as the general took the stage. He embraced Sarah briefly, then turned to address the crowd. But before he began his speech, he said something that wasn't in his prepared remarks. "When I spoke at that gala 6 months ago," he said, "I was angry. I was angry at the ignorance and cruelty Staff Sergeant Mitchell faced. But anger alone doesn't create change. What creates change is people like Sarah, who take their pain and transform it into purpose, who refuse to hide or be diminished, who stand up and say, 'This is who I am, this is what I've been through, and I'm not ashamed.'" He looked directly at Sarah, standing beside him on the stage. "You taught me something too, Sarah. You taught me that defending veterans isn't enough. We need to create space for veterans to defend themselves, to tell their own stories, to be visible and valued in their communities. You've done that with courage and grace, and I'm proud to know you." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, healing tears. She thought about the journey she had taken. From that terrified medic in a burning convoy to a woman standing on a stage, using her voice to make a difference. The scars on her skin had not changed, but everything else had. After the event, as people mingled and shared stories, Sarah found herself surrounded by veterans thanking her for speaking so honestly about her struggles. A young veteran recently returned from deployment told her that hearing her story made him feel less alone. An older veteran said she had inspired him to finally seek treatment for PTSD he had been ignoring for decades. A military spouse hugged her and thanked her for helping her understand what her husband was going through. As the evening wound down, Sarah stepped outside for some air. The night was clear and cool, stars visible overhead despite the city lights. She stood alone for a moment, simply breathing, simply being. No longer hiding, no longer ashamed, no longer defined by her wounds, but not denying them either. Just Sarah Mitchell, veteran and survivor, scared but strong, imperfect but trying, using her story to make the world a little better for those who came after her. General Morrison found her there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Your years of service, the things you saw and did, the cost it extracted from you." The general considered the question carefully. "Regret is complicated," he said finally. "There are individual moments I regret, decisions that haunt me. But do I regret serving? No, service gave my life meaning and purpose. It connected me to something larger than myself. The cost was real, but so was the value." He turned to look at her. "What about you?" Sarah thought about the burning convoy, about the soldiers she had saved and the ones she couldn't, about the scars that marked her body and the trauma that marked her soul. She thought about the shame she had carried and the purpose she had found, about the community that had embraced her and the people she was helping with her story. "No," she said with certainty. "I don't regret it. I wish I hadn't been hurt. I wish I didn't have PTSD. I wish that night at the gala had never happened. But all of those things led me here, to this moment, to this purpose. I'm helping people. I'm making a difference. That matters." General Morrison nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood together in the quiet night, 2 warriors marked by service, finding peace not in forgetting, but in transforming their experiences into something meaningful. The scars remained, as they always would, but they no longer defined or limited them. They were simply part of the story, part of the journey, part of what made them who they were. And that, Sarah realized, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.